Hi, I'm Paddy Lavelle, General Secretary of Education and Training Boards Ireland. Welcome to our Future of Education and Training in Ireland video series, where I have a short chat with leading experts from our sector and beyond to get their insights and predictions on the future of education and training in Ireland. Today I'm chatting with Dean Stokes, the Head of Customer Success for Europe, the Middle East and Africa regions at Google for Education. While working in a secondary school for 9 years, Dean taught media studies and trained teachers on the effective use of technology. Since then, he has trained thousands of teachers around the world and helps education at all levels think about their approach to supporting educators with technology for learning, teaching, and administration. Welcome, Dean. Thanks very much for being with us today. And if we're talking about the future of education and training, I have to ask you about AI. What formal role, if any, do you see it playing in the classroom?
Well, I think AI more broadly has been built into Google's products for a long time. For example, if you're using Gmail, you probably would have noticed that you don't get a lot of spam in your inbox. That's because in the background, AI is working to find 99.9% of spam emails and stop them from getting there in the first place. So for us, it isn't anything new. I think like all technology, really, it's inevitable that it will come to the classroom in some form or another. The conversation more recently is centered around generative AI, so products like ChatGPT, Google Bard, for example. And our approach to AI in our end products is about making it as assistive as possible. So to give an example of a feature, again, that already exists, in Google Sheets, you can use the Explore tool and just ask a question about the data in the spreadsheet, and it will give you the answer with the formula that you can use. So I think as we move into the future and we see more and more products being built with AI, we'll be thinking about how they can be assistive to teachers in tools like Google Classroom and so on. And I can go into a bit more detail a bit later on about the specifics. But I guess the answer is that it's inevitable. It's probably more a question of when rather than if.
And because we're education and training boards, we're always worried about the risk to students. And we're thinking about how we can plan our way into the future about AI. Have you any ideas about that?
Yeah, so I think, right now we're in this kind of boom. So lots of talk of ChatGPT happening, students perhaps using it nefariously for answering essay questions that they've been given. I tend to think that banning technology like this is a game of whack-a-mole. So whilst it might buy you some time to have a think about the right way to deal with it, long term, we're going to have to rethink kind of how we do things. If an AI can write a really good answer to an essay question that's being set now, we probably need to ask some pretty profound questions about what even should we be assessing or what should assessment look like. I think for now, one of the key things is educating students, making sure they understand that just because something is giving you an answer, it doesn't necessarily mean that answer is right. So one way that I've seen some teachers deal with this is to say, well, they've generated an answer using AI, and then have students try and figure out where the AI was wrong in that answer as well. There's the concept of hallucinations in generative AI. So if you ask it about a fact, for example, it might not actually know that fact from all of the training data that it's been given. So it will just make one up, right, that sounds like it's real. So there was an example, I was at an event yesterday, and someone asked it to summarize a review of a new Zelda game that had come out. But the reality was what it gave would look like a really good summary, but actually it had made up some sales figures for the game. It had given it a completely different score from the article. And they're the watch outs right now, I think, is make sure that just like before, it's best practice online to double check everything that you are looking up, handing in, giving out. I think that's probably the first step.
And I like what you said there about the teachers having to look at what ChatGPT, for example, or a Google Bard can do, and then say, set the test or the whatever the assessment task is, in order to be realistic about the fact that students can generate their own.
Absolutely. I think that we're already seeing teachers use some of these tools for themselves. If you think just about needing to develop a risk assessment, let's say for a school trip that you're taking, well, you can save yourself some time. So I think there are some really positive uses, like with all technology. It's just making sure that we're making people aware of some of the inconsistencies in using that tech, and that it won't always be positive. But that doesn't mean that we should just close the door and say, this isn't for us.
And in the context of teacher supply, which is a big issue in Ireland, as it is all over the world, really, do you see any future for assistive technology like AI in dealing with teacher shortages?
Yeah, I think this has been a question that's come up a lot. You know, will technology ever replace a teacher? My view on this is that I think teaching and learning is a fundamentally human thing. It involves a lot of empathy. There are a lot of personal relationships in a classroom that allow you to best understand the student that's in front of you, context that a machine is never going to understand, whether it's the local context or that individual's own context. More broadly, though, if you imagine right now, it's kind of crazy to think that there are still some people in the world that don't have access to any kind of formal education. So in those cases, I kind of think, well, yeah, you know, learning from a machine is better than not learning at all, not receiving any kind of education. There was a TED talk recently from Sal Khan, who founded Khan Academy, which is a website where you can learn for free. And they have been testing a generative AI tool called Khan Migo. And that was really interesting to me because I suddenly thought, actually, not only does this allow you to get help in moments that a teacher isn't in the room, even if you are someone that's able to get an education, but now you're opening the door to people that aren't able to get an education for whatever reason, because of cost, distance, whatever it might be, teacher shortages and so on. So I think there's a middle ground where, you know, technology is not going to replace teachers, but at the same time, it can probably enable some people to learn when they couldn't before.
So, Dean, what does the future of learning look like in the broader sense?
Yeah, big question. I get this one a lot, and I struggle with it sometimes because I think that with a company like Google, I don't necessarily think it's Google's place to say, here's what the future of education should be. Instead, I think it's our place to say, to build the tools that people are asking for that will enable whatever the future of education might look like. That being said, that answer never seems to go down well. So I think there are three things. One is, and these are things, by the way, that I think will always be the future of education. You could ask this question at any point in the future or the past, and these are three things that I think you could always say. So one is that I think the future of education needs to be more personal. You know, I think we would all agree that if every student had their own individual teacher, they would be more successful. So how do we do that without actually having a teacher for every student? The second is, I think in order to do that, it needs to be more measurable. So thinking about what are the things that we measure and how do we measure them? And then thirdly, kind of back to the last point that I made in the last question, it needs to be more equitable. You know, there's still a large number of people globally that don't have access to a formal education. So how might we provide access in those cases? But then also more locally, how do we make sure that it isn't a postcode lottery of the school that you attend means that you get a better education, or if you go to an independent school, you get a better education than a state school in some places, for example. And I think technology can help in all three of those areas. One of the sticking points, again, that I mentioned in the last question is, I think, assessment. You know, we're assessing still in the same way that we have been since the dawn, really, of formal education. And if we want to deliver genuinely personalized learning, is one assessment, pen to paper, that's often essays at the end of a student's school career enough to really be able to deliver that personalized education? Or do we need to be doing something different? And do we need to be thinking about the different skills?
I just want to interrupt you about the personal, because I've been thinking about that. I'm a fan of one-to-one devices in schools, and I think they can work very well, but it really depends on context and how they're used. Absolutely. But that idea of having to personalize seems to get away from the fact that, you know, school essentially is about somebody organizing learning and for groups of students to speak to one another. Yeah. And without the group of students, without that interaction and without the group making sense of things together, there is no education. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that personalized doesn't necessarily have to mean completely independent. And so I think even in a group setting, you could say, well, what the task that I've designed for that student working in part of that group is really good for them. It's going to stretch them in the right places and support them where they need that as well. Just thinking about work life for me, I really like the hybrid approach because I can't just sit on my own in my home office just working every day of the week. So going in 3 days a week really works for me. And I think in a similar way, I agree. And I was a former teacher. My room was always set up in groups of students because I think that collaboration is really important. And often they're learning from each other, right? The way that you pick up skills isn't just going to be from the person at the front of the room. It's going to be from the other students that you're observing and working with as well.
Okay. So Dean, what are the 3 top practical tools that Google provides, which Education and Training Board educators and trainers can use?
Well, I like this question because I spent, after teaching, lots of time training teachers. So 3 off the top of my head are Google Classroom, obviously. It creates a hub for teaching and learning. It was designed for education, so it's not some business tool that has then been brought into the education space. And that means that it's designed for there being a teacher and students in the group. So it's great if you're in class together and you just set and assess assignments. It means that there's a communication channel open between you to the group and back, and also individually with the students too. And then also similar for homework. So that as a hub for sure would be the #1 thing. The next, and probably my favorite tool, and we made lots of use of this at my school back in the day, was Google Forms. If you can think of anything that you're using right now where you're getting students to scribble their name down on a piece of paper or something. I used to see after school clubs in PE would have a sheet on the door of their office and kids would just put their names on it. Rather than do that, just have a form, get them to fill the form out. And then you've got everything in a spreadsheet, because I used to see them typing that up from the piece of paper into the spreadsheet with their fixture list. And then we took it further and started doing automation. So for cover teacher, booking time, if you need a day off and booking a cover teacher, we automated all of that in Google Forms. So I think that's really powerful. And there's the assessment part to that if you wanted to use it for quick quizzes too. And then finally, I would say Google Sites. See a lot of use of Google Sites in education. I think, in fact, that education is the biggest use case for Google Sites. There are a few different examples. One is just literally using Google Sites for your school website. Really helpful if you're a small primary. You don't want to spend your budget on paying a company to come and create a website for you, put it on Google Sites. But also inside the school, having students create portfolios with them and keeping a log of the things that they've enjoyed or the work that they've done that they can take with them. Some really good examples of this in Ireland with transition year and keeping a log of all of the experiences that those students have had through that transition year as well.
How can we make education and training more inclusive in terms of those with additional educational needs?
Yeah, so I was actually at an event yesterday with a company called TextHelp who make assistive software. And Paddy from that company said something which I found really interesting. He said he doesn't like the term inclusive practice because inclusive practice should just be standard practice. So I think technology has a big role to play here. You know, if you think that every student could have a device where they're able to choose the settings that work for them. So if you have a student that's hearing impaired, they can turn on captions on any of the content, let's say. But it also means that no student feels like they stand out for some reason because maybe they have an additional adult working with them. You know, they're empowered at that point to say, yeah, I'm going to change the background color of this document because that's going to help me read. And all of these features that are designed to be assistive aren't only helpful for students with additional needs, but they're helpful for all students. I think one part that we can play as educators or as trainers is enabling those features when we're running training or we're delivering lessons, you know. Simple things like if I'm playing a video, turn the captions on the video. I often find myself looking at subtitles if they're on a TV to follow along with what's being said. And you start to realize actually that you do miss quite a bit otherwise. Or things like if you're in a room and you're offered a microphone, use it. You don't know that that might be helping someone in that room who wouldn't otherwise say something. And it doesn't hurt to do. And so I think there are kind of simple steps that we can take, and then broadly access to technology, I think, can be helpful in this space.
So on a more personal level, what's your view on the importance of offline time, professionally and personally? And how do you fare in this yourself?
Yeah, I really value having time away from tech. And I say that as someone who loves technology personally as well. If you come to my house, everything that can have technology attached to it does. But I think it's important, going back to the creativity piece, to be creative, I think you need time for thought. You know, I sometimes feel like we work in a world that values productivity or sees productivity as just how many words am I typing per minute, perhaps. But actually, if you can take time to be with your thoughts and to enable some of that thinking, then I think that allows for creativity. I really make sure if I'm taking a holiday, if I'm taking annual leave from work, then I really am offline. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that you can't properly recharge if you dip into your work email. And two, it's important to model that for your colleagues as well, whether you're a manager or not. Just other people seeing that it's okay to do that, I think is really important.
Listen, thanks very much for your time, Dean, today, and it's been really interesting talking to you.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.